Greetings, environmentalist, and we're to one of my absolute favorite topics of the semester. There'll be a couple of them, but this one's way up there. Stormwater. You think about that and people are like, well, I get it, it's rainwater. Why is it regulated? We're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about the specifics of the different types of regulations that apply to stormwater. So let's look at your learning objectives first. We're going to identify pollution issues associated with stormwater and then evaluate causes of stormwater contamination, two very different things. We're going to distinguish the differences between the industrial rules, construction rules, and municipal separate storm sewer system rules, and talk about how the general permits have been designed by EPA and subsequently adopted by states to help prevent stormwater from getting into waters of the United States. We're going to discuss the purpose of a stormwater pollution prevention plan and just look at a handful of stormwater best management practices to help reduce pollution when it rains. So let's get started. Why study stormwater? Well, I'm going to give you a little carrot that you may not have considered, and the same applies for waste. Those of you who have this information, it makes you more marketable in the workplace, because if you're like a manufacturer or somebody that produces stuff, they're all subject to these rules. And so it's really a great benefit to have the knowledge, because many students that have been in these classes before who've gotten this have had a leg up, have been able to get the jobs faster and move up the ladder faster because they've had it. Plus, I think you want to be a good environmental steward, so knowing about stormwater should help you do that. We're going to watch a video, a couple of them in these, and let's start with this video now.
So right now I am joined with Heather Miranda of the city's Environmental Services Division, and we are starting a three-part series focusing on issues of water in the Santa Clarita Valley. Heather, we're standing in front of a storm drain. Can you start us on issues that residents and businesses should know about storm drains?
Well, the first thing to know is that a storm drain is designed to bring water quickly from streets to the Santa Clara River to prevent flooding. That's their only job. The problem is that when we litter, when we don't pick up after our pets, when we have carpet cleaners who don't pick up and recycle their water, or auto detailers, anything that is going into the street, on our sidewalks, and our driveways, all that will end up in the storm drain system, be picked up with water from overwatering lawns or from rain, and it will go directly to the Santa Clara River, which is 50% of our drinking water supply. And that's a big problem, because dog waste contaminates the drinking water. All the chemicals from carpet cleaning, all the chemicals from anything that we do in our day-to-day lives is not something really that you want to drink. And it's also bad for the habitat, it's bad for the animals down there, and it's bad for people who recreate near the river, because if you touch that water, you can get sick.
And you know, you mentioned littering and you mentioned animal waste. Car washing your car in your driveway is also a big issue.
That's right. Anything that you do outside that goes onto a paved surface, whether it be your driveway, a sidewalk, or a street, all of those areas are oriented towards the storm drains to make sure that those areas don't flood in a rain event. And unfortunately, all the water picks up all those pollutants and moves it to the storm drains. So you need to do things like be cautious of your outdoor water use. So not overwatering your lawn, for example, is a really good way to make sure that not only you save water and not waste water, but also prevent urban runoff. Because if you apply chemicals to your grass, fertilizers or pesticides or anything like that, and you overwater your lawn, that chemical is now entering the storm drain system. Same thing with the litter, and same thing with the dog waste. You have to be conscientious of everything you do outside. It doesn't just go away.
So really it's an educational thing of letting people know that what they do leave behind will ultimately contaminate something. So for people that wash their cars, I know that, for a long time, environmentally speaking, we urge them to go to car washing businesses because they use reclaimed water and they recycle. Is that the only option for them? Is there another way to wash your car safely?
Many professional auto detailers, the mobile ones, some of the more responsible ones have invested in water recycling, or they have vacuums that'll clean up the water so that it doesn't run off into the storm drain system. Same thing with carpet cleaners. There's a lot of companies out there who have actually been conscientious and bought these products that recycle the water and capture it. Then they can take it to an actual sewer, which goes to the treatment plant that actually does get treated.
This really is a big issue for the city. We have a whole division that deals with this.
It's very important. And it's also a regulatory thing where we're going to have to start being in the river and actually monitoring at our outfalls at those areas. And so we're going to have to know a lot more detail about the quality of the water coming out of our storm drains. And so it's becoming even more important for us to, as a city and as a community, really understand and be respectful of that storm drain and really consider that as part of the river and not just a place where things go away.
Right, and besides being sort of unneighborly and unsanitary and polluting, it's also illegal.
That's right. You can get tickets. We do have ordinances on the books, and the county also has ordinances on the books. It is not legal to dump anything in the storm drain. The storm drain is only for flood control. It's only for rain to prevent people's houses and businesses and roads from flooding. If you are dumping anything else in there, we find out about it, you can get fined, you can get tickets. There's all sorts of things that we would prefer not to do, but there it is. That's what we have to do in order to protect the river.
Heather, I want to thank you for joining us for this part 1 series on focusing on water issues in Santa Clarita Valley. Next, we're going to focus on the storm drains themselves, and we're actually going to see how they get cleaned. And then later on, we are going to go into the Santa Clara River and see where everything ends up.
So now that you watched that video, that was a really great overview of what stormwater is and why it's regulated. Now that was from a perspective of a city. So that would fall under the municipal separate storm sewer system, and all the storm drains and ditches she was referring to, those are separate storm sewer systems. And what that simply means is that it's a separate pipe from what goes to the sewer plant, or what you would know as the wastewater plant. So let's back up a little bit and talk about MPDES and explain how all this came to be, because like waste, there's a story for the water rules as well. MPDES, what is it? It stands for National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. If you read it backwards, it makes more sense. It's some kind of a system that helps eliminate discharges that cause pollution in our nation. And that's how I like to teach it, because NPDES is just an acronym for National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. And this is a permitting process that addresses water pollution by regulating point source discharges and non-point source discharges. And today we'll be looking at non-point source discharges dealing with stormwater. And whether it's point source or non-point source discharges, they're unauthorized discharges to waters of the United States. So the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, and state governments have been given regulatory authority to administer the MPDES program. So your state would likely have an equivalent of that. For Texas, it's the TPDES program. So what is MPDES? The program regulates stormwater because rain or snow melt flows, and the runoff flows over land, impervious cover, which actually refers to parking lots and streets, picking up pollutants along the way. And these can harm your rivers, your lakes, your streams, and coastal waters because the water is never treated at a wastewater treatment plant. Guaranteed test question. Stormwater is never treated. That's the big to-do about it. Since it's not treated, we have to take preliminary steps to help protect it so it doesn't contaminate waters of the United States. So what is the definition of stormwater? It's any form of water that naturally falls from the sky, including and such as rain, sleet, snow, or hail or snow melt. So this should look familiar to you. You've all seen storm drains and inlet structures and so forth where water drains or a ditch when it rains. Those are intended for rainwater only, not for trash, not for dumping of sewage, not for anything else. They're strictly there for flood control. So MPDES regulates stormwater discharges from 3 specific sources. 1, from industrial activities where something's manufactured. Number 2, from construction activities where the ground cover is removed and sediment is exposed while something's being built. And number 3, from drains and ditches in a city known as a separate storm sewer system. That's where the word municipal comes from, city-owned, separate storm sewer systems, such as storm drains, gutters, stormwater conveyance systems, such as this one right here. That's an MS4. And you can see the sheen right here is going directly into the storm drain and into this inlet structure right here. We don't want that. So that's why these 3 programs have been developed by EPA. The EPA has created MPDES, and it's created it in the form of general permits. Now, there is such a thing as an individual permit for a site, not the way somebody wants to go, but general permits for industrial construction in MS4s, MS4 again meaning Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, 4 S's, S4, storm, or Separate Storm Sewer System, keep that in mind, 4 S's, that's where the S4 is. These general permits are kind of like cookie cutter permits. They apply to a general group of businesses, entities, or cities that meet some general criteria. That's why they're called general permits. So by definition, a general permit is a permit that has been developed to protect the environment for a specific regulated group through the utilization of best management practices and site improvements. These are not individual facility permits. Those require engineering plans, they require public notice. Instead, these contain broad general guidelines for a specific permitted group. For example, for a construction site, you can see that they have best management practices up in the form of a silt fence, but look what happened when it rained too much. It caused mud to overflow, and that's an example of why we have MPDES for stormwater. So let's watch another video.
Stormwater runoff is what happens when rain falls on the surface of the ground, and once it hits the ground, it can mobilize pollutants that are already on the surface, like heavy metals or trash.
When stormwater runoff runs into the drain that's in the street, those pipes don't go to a treatment plant. They just run into the nearest body of water, usually without any treatment at all.
It really impacts the water quality considerably, and it can degrade aquatic habitat for fish and amphibians and the creatures that use our water bodies. And it's also human health too. Stormwater runoff is probably the primary reasons why beaches are closed.
And I wonder, still I wonder, who'll stop the rain? I went down Virginia.
There are cities in those upper parts of the watershed that really feel like they don't have a strong connection to the coastline, and yet that watershed is ultimately coming down through the rivers and the creeks and impacting the coast.
The first flush is that initial pulse of runoff that comes off an urban site or a residential site. The first flush generally has higher pollutant concentrations, higher loads than the rest of the storm events.
Traditionally, the way we've dealt with stormwater is we've allowed water to run off the roofs of the houses, down the downspouts, into the roads, through the drop inlet, into the pipe system, and then straight out to the river. The traditional thinking was to get those stormwater flows out to the ocean as rapidly as possible.
So a natural watershed does have a lot of native vegetation that will slow the rainfall down, and as the water runs across the surface, it infiltrates in. And so we call that sort of a natural watershed process.
Creeks and streams have, in a natural setting, have floodplains. Those floodplains act as sponges. Towns and cities where we have huge extensive impervious area, those floodplain sponges have been paved over, hence raising
the water level and the flow within that channel very dramatically in relatively short periods of time with relatively low rainfall. So the way we can counteract the loss of our floodplain sponges is wherever we do development, try and encourage infiltration using techniques which we call low impact development.
The exciting thing is this new wave of looking at low impact development and approaching the urban landscapes, their built landscapes, as if they were natural watersheds that used to exist before the urban area, and trying to mimic a lot of the natural functions and behavior as we build out.
We're trying to get people to think about watersheds and think about how, rather than building huge treatment facilities at the bottom of the watershed to address stormwater problems, which would really be impossible given how built out our coastline is, that we're trying to get them to work within the watersheds and really find ways to capture and treat and then reuse the stormwater runoff in a beneficial way.
We're all live in a watershed, and so I really think it's in everyone's best interest. It's in society's best interest to really take care of our water resources.
Long as I remember, the rain's been coming down. Clouds of mystery pouring, confusion on the ground. Good men through the ages.
So great video over why it's important to have stormwater protection and that people be aware of what watershed protection is. When I worked for the Brazos River Authority, I worked in the watershed protection program, and that was our job, was to try to find the sources of pollution, educate the public on how to mitigate those, and move forward with a way that helps everyone deal with pollution problems that ultimately get to our water source. While you may not live next to a coastline, like I don't, it still applies because we're drinking water from upstream, and that's come from rainfall that's washed into rivers, lakes, and streams, and it's also coming from wastewater treatment plants that are discharging their wastewater that's been treated into the surface water. So we're going to learn about some general stormwater terms now, and we'll start with the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, known as a SWEP. So if you'll say that with me, SWEP. Say it again, SWEP. I know it's a funny word. Sometimes you'll hear people call it SWP3, and it's because it's a stormwater for SW and 3 Ps, Pollution Prevention Plan. So read it backwards, kind of like MPDES. It's a plan that prevents pollution from stormwater. That's all it is. And this is a requirement in any type of permitted facility for stormwater, is that they must have a SWEP, or Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. So I highlighted where the SWP3 comes from in blue so you could kind of recognize it a little easier. So stormwater permits require that each owner and operator develop a plan in accordance with the permit guidelines that will help mitigate stormwater pollution. So a SWEP, or SWP3, helps operators plan and implement best management practices, all with the purpose of reducing polluted stormwater from leaving a site. We just want to reduce it. It doesn't say it has to eliminate it. It just says it needs to be reduced. SWEPs, or SWP3s, are quote-unquote living documents. What does that mean? This means that they're utilized daily at the site and are constantly being updated by an operator. So when you drive by like a construction site, they'll have a stormwater pollution prevention plan there, or they should. And they should be updating how they're managing their best management practices on a map and in their plan, because the plan stays where the stormwater issues are. It doesn't need to be approved somewhere for like at a state agency or EPA. If they follow the general guidelines for the permit, their plan should be in compliance. So what's a BMP? It stands for Best Management Practice. Here's a great one. Here's a storm inlet drain right here. So when the rain comes off, it'll drain in here. And there's several best management practices in this picture. You can see they put a big industrial, it's called a sock here. We'll look at those later. And it's blocked out any water from getting into this inlet. They've done another type of industrial straw sock here to keep any mud from getting in the road, and they've done a third one, which they have a silt fence right here. So whatever technology is out there, it doesn't matter what it is. But the rules say is that sites must implement best management practices to reduce the potential for contaminated stormwater leaving a regulated site. It doesn't dictate what specific types need to be there. Now, let me caveat that by saying a city ordinance might actually give an example that the city may require silt fences. But at the federal level, that's not required. So the federal level simply itemizes that you must have best management practices and leaves it up to the facility to choose the most appropriate and cost-effective one for them. Qualifying rain event, QRE. This is a rain event that produces 0.5 inches of runoff or more, and the key part was runoff. So each regulated site must maintain proper instrumentation such as a rain gauge to accurately monitor the amount of precipitation to determine if they have a qualifying rain event. This really applies more to construction and to industrial facilities, but it'll become clear to you why as we go through them. Quarterly visual monitoring, known as QVM. This is strictly an industrial inspection for industrial regulated stormwater sites. And it's a visual inspection conducted by a certified site operator or representative who observes abnormal characteristics of the stormwater during or within the first flush of the qualifying storm event. So what is abnormal? Can be a variety of things, but a couple of examples. Maybe the watercolor is funny. Maybe it's neon white or neon green. That's not normal, right? Maybe it smells funny. Maybe there's foam that's really thick on top of it or an oil sheen. Could be a variety of different characteristics, and there's a state form, at least for Texas, that has a pre-done things to look for. So who's qualified and certified to do this? Whoever's deemed in the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, or SWEP, as being the person who can recognize these. There's no special certification. You don't have to go to school for it or anything like that. It's just that you know your site and you know what the water should look like when it rains. No exposure. This deals with the industrial permit, and this refers to stormwater exemption for regulated industrial facilities which can prove that they have no pollution or exposure to the environment when it rains, even if an act of nature occurs. So let's say 20 inches fall tomorrow. If some facilities claim no exposure, they're probably going to have stormwater runoff, and you're probably thinking, well, who would even care with 20 inches or more? Everything's going to be underwater. That may be true, but nevertheless, they would still be out of compliance if they had claimed no exposure. Very rarely will a facility have no exposure 100% of the time. What's a site notice? This is what you would look for if you were doing a site notice. And a site notice simply refers to signage that a regulated construction site is required to post, which identifies how to contact the site operator regarding environmental issues. If a citizen observes an environmental violation, this signage provides the necessary information about the site to file a complaint. So I had a very wealthy friend who I have many stories about in different classes, but this one has to do with her building a house in a very nice new neighborhood where I live out in the city I live. And she was like one of the first houses to be built out of a series of homes. And so they were still building, and there was a stormwater pollution prevention plan, but the best management practices were not working so well. So she had a brand new, really, really hot car. And you can kind of just visualize this really nice black sports car. You just can read between the lines what it might have been. And she's got her $300 or $400 Italian shoes on, and she goes slipping and sliding, and it muds up her brand new wax job. And I get a call, and she is hot. She is mad. She wants to complain to someone and wants a car wash and wax. And then I tell her to get out. She gets to take her expensive shoes off, right, to go look at the stormwater plan. So her shoes are in. Now she's even more mad. And so she goes, and she's like, oh, well, I'm just going to call the state and I'm going to complain. I'm like, well, no, call the operator. So she did, and they were out there within 10 minutes. Let's just say that she got her car washed and a new set of shoes. They knew they were out of compliance and didn't want her to turn them in because they had no best management practices that were working. Most facilities do an outstanding job of making a good faith effort to protect the environment. This was one of those that did not. So we're always looking for people to do the right thing. So there's something in the stormwater rules called a notice of intent and a notice of termination. An NOI, or a notice of intent, is the official form that actually begins your coverage for stormwater because it informs the EPA or State Department of Environmental Quality, known as a DEQ, that your facility is obtaining a general stormwater permit. To conclude that coverage for your site, let's say you're a construction site and you've been in your construction project, or maybe you were a business that was an industry and you're closing business or you're selling your business, then you would have a notice of termination known as a NOT, N-O-T. And this is the official form that informs the EPA or the Department of Environmental Quality at the state level that a facility is terminating coverage of a general stormwater permit. These are easy to find forms on the EPA website, and they're at the state levels as well. So I'm going to take a break there, and we're going to come back and learn a little bit more about permits. So I'll see you back in a few. Bye.